The enemy opposite them was the battle-hardened Volkssturm Panzer Division I, Hermann Göring, supported by elements of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division. They owned the high ground, and they used it to rain down death with terrifying efficiency. The threat of a mass German armored assault to finally drive the Allies into the sea was a constant, chilling fear that gripped every man in the line. The morning of February 26th dawned cold and gray, a typical Anzio day punctuated by the sporadic crump of mortar and the distant mechanical growl of German vehicles. For the men of the 30th Infantry Regiment, huddled in their waterlogged foxholes, it felt like just another day in hell. But this day would be different. This day, a man named Audie Murphy would etch his name into the annals of military history with an act of almost unbelievable courage. The German attack began just as the weak winter sun broke through the clouds. It was a full-throated assault. Infantry, supported by tanks, surged forward. The American lines buckled under the sheer weight of the German advance. Machine gun fire ripped through the air, and the earth trembled with the explosion of shells. Murphy's company was taking heavy casualties. His best friend was hit, a devastating blow that seemed to momentarily freeze time. But Audie Murphy wasn't the kind to freeze. He was the kind to get angry. As his men were forced to fall back, Murphy saw an M10 tank destroyer nearby that had been hit and was now burning. The crew was dead. Most soldiers would see a burning metal coffin, a death trap waiting for a catastrophic explosion. Murphy saw an opportunity. He ordered his remaining men to retreat to a safer position, telling them he'd cover their withdrawal. Then, with German infantry and tanks closing in, he did something that defied all logic and instinct for self-preservation. He climbed onto the burning tank destroyer. From this exposed, precarious perch, he swung the vehicle's .50 caliber machine gun toward the advancing enemy and opened fire. The heavy machine gun roared to life, spitting a stream of lead that cut down the German infantry like a scythe. He was a lone figure, silhouetted against the smoke and flames, a one-man army holding back the tide. The Germans were stunned. Who was this madman? They concentrated their fire on him. Bullets pinged off the metal hull around him. He was wounded in the leg, but he kept firing. For over an hour, Audie Murphy single-handedly fought off an entire German company. He was a whirlwind of controlled fury, directing his fire with deadly precision, repelling wave after wave of attackers. He only stopped when he ran out of ammunition. Bleeding and exhausted, he finally climbed down from the smoldering wreck, stumbled back to his men, and immediately organized a counterattack. Inspired by his incredible bravery, his men rallied. They pushed the Germans back, reclaiming the ground they had lost. When his commanding officers later asked him why he did it, Murphy's response was simple and understated. They were killing my friends. It was a testament to his character, a quiet, unassuming man who possessed a core of absolute steel. His actions that day earned him the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. He was just 19 years old. Audie Murphy's story at Anzio is more than just a tale of battlefield heroics. It's a powerful reminder of what ordinary people are capable of in extraordinary circumstances. He wasn't a superhero. He was a young man from Texas who loved his friends and refused to let them be overrun. He saw his duty and he performed it, far beyond any reasonable expectation. This single act of valor was a turning point, not just in that specific skirmish, but in the morale of the men fighting in the brutal Anzio stalemate. It showed that even when outnumbered and outgunned, the will of a single determined soldier could change the course of a battle. Audie Murphy became a legend, a symbol of the resilience and courage of the American soldier. His legacy is a powerful story of bravery, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bonds forged in the crucible of war. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this story, please consider liking the video and subscribing for more. In the sector held by Barden's company, the front lines were a stalemate. A brutal, unchanging landscape separated them from the enemy. Nearly 2 miles of open, shell-cratered fields and winding drainage ditches made up this stretch of no man's land. It was a vast, desolate expanse, so wide that it paradoxically offered a kind of safety zone from the crack of a rifle or the chatter of a machine gun. In this part of the war, typical engagements happened at distances well under 1,000 yards. Here, the distance itself was the shield. But this false sense of security was shattered daily, not by bullets, but by the terror that rained from the sky. The primary threat wasn't a soldier you could see, but the unseen hand of the artilleryman. The constant fear was the shell that could land anywhere, anytime. And even more than the artillery, it was the dreaded Nebelwerfer. They announced their arrival with a horrifying, shrieking scream that tore through the air, a sound designed to break a man's spirit long before the shrapnel ever reached him. It was psychological warfare at its most raw, a symphony of destruction that frayed the nerves of even the most hardened veterans. For Barden, a machine gunner, his entire world was distilled down to the 2 sturdy legs of his M1919 Browning. The bipod was his anchor in this sea of mud and fear. It was the only solid thing in a world that constantly threatened to dissolve into chaos. His universe was the steel of his weapon, the worn wooden grips, and the heavy belt of .30 caliber ammunition that fed it. The Browning was more than just a gun. It was an extension of himself, his shield, and his sword. It was his job to lay down a curtain of fire, to suppress the enemy, to protect his comrades. He was the linchpin of his platoon's defense, the one who held the line when everything else gave way. His position was a carefully dug-in emplacement, reinforced with sandbags and scavenged timbers. It offered a commanding view of the bleak no-man's land. From this small fortress of earth and canvas, Barden and his assistant gunners scanned the opposite side, watching for any sign of movement, any flicker of activity that might signal an attack. They were hunters, patiently waiting. Their days were a monotonous cycle of watchfulness, punctuated by the sudden, heart-stopping terror of an artillery strike. You'd be cleaning the gun, sharing a cold ration, or reading a letter from home, and then the whistle would start, growing louder and closer until the world exploded around you. The ground would shake violently, and dirt and debris would rain down, forcing them to cower in their foxholes, praying the next shell wouldn't find them. After the barrage lifted, a deafening silence would fall, broken only by the ringing in their ears and the distant cries of the wounded. Then slowly, life would resume. They would emerge, check on each other, and begin the painstaking process of repairing their damaged defenses. It was a grim routine, a testament to human resilience in the face of relentless destruction. Barden's world revolved around the mechanics of his weapon. He knew its every quirk, every sound. The satisfying clank of the charging handle, the smooth pull of the bolt, the distinct rhythm of its firing, these were the sounds of his survival. He could break it down and reassemble it blindfolded, a skill honed through endless hours of practice. Keeping the M1919 in perfect working order was not just a duty. It was an obsession. A jam or a stoppage at the wrong moment could mean death, not just for him, but for everyone who depended on him. His relationship with his assistant gunner, a young man from Ohio named Miller, was forged in this crucible of shared danger. They didn't need many words. A nod, a glance, a gesture was often enough. Miller carried the extra barrels and the heavy ammunition boxes, his body aching under the weight. He was the one who fed the ammo belt into the receiver, ensuring a steady, uninterrupted stream of fire. They were a team, a two-man engine of war, their movements synchronized by instinct and experience. They shared everything, their meager rations, their letters from home, their deepest fears spoken only in the dead of night. One cold, misty morning, the routine was broken. The usual pre-dawn artillery barrage was heavier, more concentrated. The screaming Nebelwerfers seemed to tear the sky apart. As the shelling finally ceased, an eerie silence descended, thicker and more menacing than usual. Bardone gripped the handles of his Browning, his knuckles white. He and Miller scanned the horizon, their eyes straining through the lingering smoke and mist. And then they saw it. Figures, ghost-like in the dawnlight, emerging from the enemy trenches. Dozens of them, then hundreds, advancing across the cratered fields. It was the attack they had been waiting for, the moment all their training and waiting had been for. Barden's heart pounded against his ribs, but his hands were steady. He took a deep breath, centered himself, and sighted down the barrel. Miller was already in position, the first belt of ammunition ready. The German infantry advanced in waves, using the shell craters for cover, moving with a disciplined, chilling efficiency. They were still out of effective range, a crawling mass of field gray against the brown earth. But he had to wait for the order, wait for them to get closer. The lieutenant's whistle pierced the air, sharp and clear. Fire! Bardon squeezed the trigger. The M1919 roared to life, bucking against his shoulder. The world narrowed to the stream of tracer rounds arcing across the field, a red line connecting him to the enemy. He wasn't firing at men anymore. He was firing at targets, at a threat that had to be stopped. He swept the gun back and forth in short, controlled bursts, aiming for clusters of advancing soldiers, forcing them to go to ground. Miller was a machine, feeding the belt smoothly, tapping Bardon on the shoulder when it was time to change the glowing hot barrel. The air filled with the cacophony of battle. Rifles cracked, other machine guns joined in, and mortar started dropping shells among the attackers. But the enemy kept coming. They were determined, crawling and dashing from crater to crater, hitting closer and closer. Bardon could see their faces now, their expressions grim and set. He felt a cold knot of fear in his stomach, but he pushed it down, focusing on his task. Traverse, fire, traverse, fire. It was a deadly dance. A German machine gun team set up in a large crater and opened fire, their tracers zipping past Bardon's emplacement, kicking up dirt and smacking into his sandbags. Down! He yelled to Miller. As he ducked lower, the bullets whining inches above his head, he had to take them out. He took a moment, located their position by the flash of their muzzle, and then gave them a long, sustained burst. The enemy gun fell silent. He felt a grim satisfaction, but there was no time for relief. More soldiers were advancing, using the suppression of their own machine gun to gain ground. One group was close, maybe less than 100 yards away, preparing to assault the line. Bardon knew this was the critical moment. He changed his aim, pouring fire directly into their path, breaking up their charge and forcing them back into cover. The battle raged for what felt like an eternity. Ammunition boxes emptied, barrels were swapped, and the ground around them became littered with spent casings. Bardon's arms ached, his ears rang, and his throat was raw from shouting. But he didn't stop. He was the anchor. He was the line. Finally, the momentum of the attack faltered. The advancing waves thinned, then broke, the survivors retreating back across the hellish landscape of no man's land. A fragile quiet returned, punctuated by the moans of the wounded on both sides. Bardon leaned back against the muddy wall of his foxhole, his body trembling with adrenaline and exhaustion. Miller gave him a weak, grime-covered grin and handed him a canteen. The water was metallic and warm, but it was the best thing Bardon had ever tasted. He looked out over the field, at the cost of holding the line. His world was still the bipod of his M1919 Browning, but now it was also the exhaustion, the relief, and the profound, sobering weight of survival. For today, they had held. And in this brutal, static war, that was everything. Thank you for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing to our channel for more content like this. We appreciate your support. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a fascinating and often overlooked story from the annals of military history. A tale where ingenuity met desperation on the battlefield. We're talking about the venerable 30 caliber machine gun. Now, for anyone who knows their military hardware, the 30 cal was the workhorse, the backbone of infantry support for decades. Think of it as a sledgehammer, not a scalpel. It was a weapon of suppressive fire, designed specifically to lay down a lethal hail of bullets, to create a wall of lead that would pin down enemy infantry, forcing them to keep their heads down. Under ideal conditions, its beaten zone could stretch out to maybe 1,500 yards. But let's be clear, its effective range for any kind of aimed pinpoint fire was a tiny fraction of that. The whole idea of using this heavy, belt-fed beast as a precision instrument to pick off a specific small target at an extreme distance was not just impractical. It was completely contrary to its entire design doctrine and training. It would be like trying to perform surgery with a baseball bat. The sights weren't made for it, the mechanics weren't designed for it, and no soldier was ever trained to do it. But war has a funny way of rewriting the rule book. In the heat of battle, when survival is on the line, soldiers have always found incredible ways to push their equipment and themselves far beyond their intended limits. And on one particular day, in the middle of a brutal conflict, that's exactly what happened. The battle had been raging for hours, a familiar and deafening symphony of chaos. The crack of rifles, the thud of mortar, the deafening roar of artillery, it all blended into a constant nerve-shredding hum. Soldiers on both sides were dug in, a deadly stalemate where any movement could be your last. The air was thick with the smell of cordite and upturned earth. But then, by mid-afternoon, a new and ominous sound joined the familiar orchestra of war. It was a sound that was both familiar and yet utterly alien in this context. It wasn't the rapid, stuttering burst of a machine gun used for suppression. No, this was different. It was a single, deliberate shot. Crack. A pause. Then another. Crack. It was the sound of a 30 caliber machine gun being fired one. Round at From a well-concealed position high on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, a small team of soldiers had done the unthinkable. They had set up there. 30 cal, but not for suppressive fire. They were using it as a sniper rifle. This was a desperate gamble, born from a critical need to eliminate a high-value enemy target that was out of reach for their standard sniper rifles. The target was a command post, a communications hub, or perhaps a particularly troublesome enemy machine gun nest that was wreaking havoc on their lines. Whatever it was, it had to be destroyed, and this was their only option. Think about the sheer difficulty of what they were attempting. First, you have the weapon itself, the M1919 Browning, a common 30 cal of the era, weighed over 30 pounds, and that's before you add the tripod, which could add another 20. It's a crew-served weapon for a reason. Firing it in single shots required incredible trigger control, a delicate touch on a mechanism designed for brute force. The recoil from a .3006 round is substantial, and managing that recoil in a heavy, vibrating weapon to ensure the next shot is even remotely on target is a monumental challenge. Then you have the ammunition. Standard machine gun ammo, delivered in belts, was not match grade. It was mass-produced for volume, not for the kind of consistency needed for long-range precision. Every bullet could have slight variations in weight, powder charge, and shape, leading to unpredictable flight paths at extreme distances. And let's not forget the environment. Wind, temperature, humidity, even the rotation of the Earth. All of these factors, known as ballistics, start to have a massive effect on a bullet's trajectory over long distances. Snipers spend years mastering how to read and compensate for these variables. This machine gun crew was likely doing it on the fly, with crude equipment, and under unimaginable pressure. The sights on a standard 30 cal were rudimentary at best for this kind of work. They were designed to help the gunner lay down fire on an area, not a specific point. To make this work, the crew would have had to use a technique called walking the rounds in. The gunner would fire a shot, and a spotter, using powerful binoculars or a spotting scope, would watch for the impact of the bullet, a puff of dust, a splash in the mud. The spotter would then give corrections to the gunner. Up 20, left 10. The gunner would make tiny, meticulous adjustments to the tripod's traverse and elevation mechanism, a process of trial and error where every shot was a guess, a prayer sent downrange. Imagine the tension in that nest. The spotter, eyes straining, trying to distinguish the impact of their own small bullet amidst the chaos of the wider battle. The gunner, holding his breath, gently squeezing the trigger, feeling the powerful thud of the weapon against his shoulder, and then immediately reacquiring his sight picture, waiting for the call from his partner. Each shot was a painstaking exercise in patience and skill. They were essentially inventing a new form of long-range marksmanship in real time, with enemy fire all around them. It was a testament to the incredible adaptability of the common soldier. One of the most famous accounts of this technique comes from the legendary Marine sniper Carlos Hathcock during the Vietnam War. While he is renowned for his work with a proper sniper rifle, there's a well-documented instance where he used a 50 caliber M2 machine gun, the big brother of the 30 cal, equipped with a telescopic sight to achieve an astonishingly long-range kill. He set the M2 to single-shot fire, and with his expert knowledge of ballistics, made history. His success demonstrated that with the right skills and a bit of modification, these heavy weapons could indeed become terrifyingly effective long-range precision instruments. What our .30 cal crew was doing was a precursor to this, a field-expedient version born of necessity. They didn't have a custom-mounted unertl scope like Hathcock. They were working with iron sights and instinct. The psychological effect on the enemy must have been devastating. You expect to be safe from machine gun fire at over 1,000 yards, assuming you're not standing in an open field. But to be hunted, to be targeted with single, deliberate shots from that distance by a weapon you thought couldn't touch you? It's terrifying. It turns a weapon of area denial into a personal and very deadly threat. It's a reminder that on the battlefield, the most important component of any weapon system is the human being operating it. Their training, their courage, and their ability to innovate under fire are what truly make the difference between victory and defeat. This story, and others like it, showcases a fundamental truth about warfare. Doctrine is a guide, not a gospel. The manuals can tell you how a weapon is supposed to be used, but it asks the soldiers in the mud and the dirt who discover what it is capable of. From using mortar for direct fire to turning machine guns into sniper rifles, history is filled with these moments of battlefield genius. It's a powerful testament to the human spirit and our incredible capacity for problem solving, even in the most dire of circumstances. So the next time you see a .30 caliber machine gun in a museum or a movie, remember, it's not just a tool for spraying bullets. In the right hands, with enough skill and a little bit of desperate creativity, it could become a surgeon's scalpel at 1,000 yards, changing the course of a battle, one single, deliberate shot at a time. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into military history. Let me know in the comments if you've heard of any other incredible examples of battlefield innovation. Until next time, stay safe. From the distant tree line along the base of the Alban Hills, a distinctive diesel clatter echoed across the flatland. German armored vehicles were on the move. Through binoculars and telescopic sights, American observers spotted them, a column of panzers, likely Mark IVs, accompanied by half-tracks filled with panzer grenadiers. They were maneuvering, probing for a weak point in the Allied line. This was Italy, February 1944. The American 45th Infantry Division had just endured a brutal German counterattack aimed at throwing them back into the sea at Anzio. Now, after days of intense fighting, a tense quiet had settled over the battlefield, but no one was fooled. This was just the calm before the next storm. The Germans, under Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, were regrouping, preparing for another push. The Americans, dug in along a network of irrigation ditches and farmhouses, were desperately trying to consolidate their positions, resupply, and tend to their wounded. The battle for the Anzio beachhead had become a brutal slugging match. The initial landing, codenamed Operation Shingle, was meant to be a swift, decisive strike to outflank the German Gustav Line and open the road to Rome. But instead of a quick victory, the Allies found themselves trapped in a small, precarious pocket of land, with the Germans holding the high ground and pouring in reinforcements. Every inch of ground was contested, and the landscape was turning into a cratered, muddy wasteland reminiscent of the First World War. For the soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division, the Thunderbirds, this was a new kind of hell. Many were veterans of the Sicily campaign, but the fighting at Anzio was different. It was static, attritional warfare. The constant threat of artillery, mortar fire, and snipers frayed nerves to the breaking point. The flat, open terrain offered little cover, turning any movement into a deadly gamble. The irrigation ditches, which provided the only real protection, were often flooded with icy water, leading to trench foot and sickness. As the German panzers began their probing attack, the tension in the American lines was palpable. A runner scrambled from the observation post, his boots sinking into the thick mud. He carried a message for the company commander. Armor spotted. Coordinates X-ray, Yankee. Looks like they're heading for the Mussolini Canal. The Mussolini Canal was a critical feature of the battlefield. It was a wide, deep drainage canal that cut across the plain, forming a natural defensive barrier. If the Germans could force a crossing, they could split the American position and potentially roll up their entire flank. The defense of the canal was paramount. Word spread quickly through the trenches and foxholes. Tanks! Get ready! The G's checked their weapons, chambered rounds, and made sure their bazookas and anti-tank grenades were close at hand. The crews of the 57mm anti-tank guns swiveled their cannons, straining to get a clear line of sight. Further back, the artillery forward observers were already on the radio, calling in fire missions on the approaching German column. Fire for effect, battery adjust, target grid 459R... The first German shells began to land, screaming overhead before exploding in fountains of earth and shrapnel. The ground shook with each impact. The Americans hugged the dirt, pressing themselves as low as they could go. This was the opening act, the softening up barrage designed to suppress the defenders and keep their heads down. Then, through the smoke and haze, the panzers emerged from the tree line. They moved with a terrifying confidence, their long-barreled 75mm cannons scanning for targets. Behind them, the half-tracks disgorged their infantry, the panzer grenadiers fanning out, using the tanks for cover as they advanced. They were professionals, veterans of the Eastern Front, and they knew their business. In a forward foxhole, Private First Class John Riley, a farm boy from Oklahoma, peered over the edge. His heart was pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. He gripped his M1 Garand so tightly his knuckles were white. Beside him, his squad leader, Sergeant Frank Miller, was calmly speaking into his field telephone, relaying targeting information. They're crossing the secondary ditch, about 300 yards out. I count 4 panzers, maybe a company of infantry. Suddenly, an American Sherman tank, which had been concealed behind a ruined farmhouse, roared to life. Its turret traversed, and with a loud crack, its 75mm gun fired. The shell streaked across the field and struck the lead German panzer on its frontal plate. But the shell ricocheted off, sparking harmlessly into the air. The Panzer IV, unfazed, returned fire. Its high-velocity shell hit the Sherman square in the turret, and the American tank erupted in a ball of fire and black smoke. A wave of dread washed over the American infantry. They had just watched one of their own tanks get knocked out with a single shot. The German panzers seemed invincible, but the American G's were not so easily broken. As the Panzer Grenadiers advanced, the American machine gunners opened up, their Browning M1919 spitting streams of tracer rounds that stitched across the open ground. The distinctive ping of M1 Garands joined the chorus as riflemen began to pick their targets. The German advance slowed, the infantrymen forced to take cover. Seeing their infantry pinned down, the German tanks pressed forward, their machine guns chattering, their main guns now firing high-explosive shells into the American positions. One panzer lumbered towards a position held by a bazooka team. Two soldiers, barely out of their teens, waited, hidden in a ditch. "Wait for it," the gunner whispered to his loader. "Wait until you can see the whites of their eyes." As the tank closed to within 50 yards, the bazooka team sprang into action. With a whoosh and a flash, the rocket shot out, trailing a plume of smoke. It struck the panzer on its side armor, a weaker point. There was a bright flash and a dull thud. The tank ground to a halt, smoke pouring from its engine compartment. A moment later, the crew bailed out, only to be cut down by rifle fire. The small victory gave the defenders a much-needed boost of morale. They weren't helpless. They could fight back. Just then, the American artillery finally found its range. A storm of high-explosive shells rained down on the German formation. The sky was filled with the terrifying whistle of incoming rounds, followed by a series of deafening explosions that tore the German attack apart. One panzer was flipped onto its side by a direct hit. A half-track vanished in a cloud of smoke and debris. The surviving Panzer Grenadiers, caught in the open, broke and ran for the relative safety of the tree line. The remaining panzers, now without infantry support and under a hail of artillery fire, began to pull back. They fired smoke shells to cover their retreat, their dark shapes disappearing back into the woods from where they came. The attack had been repulsed, for now. As silence once again descended on the battlefield, broken only by the crackle of burning vehicles and the cries of the wounded, the Americans cautiously emerged from their positions. The air was thick with the acrid smell of cordite. They knew this was just a temporary reprieve. The Germans would be back. They would probe again, attack again, relentlessly testing the American lines, searching for that one crack that would let them break through to the sea. Sergeant Miller took a long drink from his canteen, the water tasting of metal and chlorine. He looked at the young faces of the men in his squad, covered in dirt and grime, their eyes wide but steady. They were scared, exhausted, and a long way from home. But they were holding the line. Here, in the muddy fields of Anzio, amidst the ruins of ancient Italy, these ordinary men were doing extraordinary things. They were the thin line standing between the beachhead and annihilation. And as the sun began to set over the Alban hills, they readied their weapons, counted their ammunition, and waited for the enemy to come again. The battle for Anzio was far from over. Thank you for watching. If you found this glimpse into the brutal fighting at Anzio compelling, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories from the front lines of history. Your support helps us continue to bring these important events to light. We'll see you in the next one.